It was one disappointment after another for Clara. She tried to kill herself once, but even failed at that attempt. She was afraid to die. Would it hurt? Would she really go to hell, like her grandmother used to say? What difference does it make anyway, she thought. Hers was a troubled past, filled with pain and disappointments, even until now, as she pulled up her pants and reached for her bra. "Get out and never come back," were the words she heard as she picked up everything except for her self-esteem. She thought that she had found love, even if it was love for a married man. He told her that he loved her, and she was so sure this time. She thought that maybe she was good for something besides sex. She was unsure of her real purpose in life. Since the age of 7, she heard how good she was, but only because it was tied to how sexually good she was. So she figured she would do what she was good at. She never did what was good for her. By now, her heart was filled with pain and anger, and the bitterness could not be chiseled away with a pickaxe, although this was a welcome option at this point. "Oh, I'll be back. Same time, same place," she said, as she walked out the door without looking back. He said, "Get out a lot here lately." "I have a lot at stake," he would whine to her. "Let me get all of my business straight, and then it'll be just you and me," he tried to reassure her. She walked out, not wanting to hear a response, out into the crisp night air. She pulled her overcoat tightly around her small frame as she blew into her tiny balled-up fist for warmth. It was a cold, wet night. The streets were wet and dirty. The pavement emitted the smells of urine and alcohol. Every now and then, the smells of the Chinese takeout on the corner wafted by. Only the red neon lights that displayed XXX flashed as a beacon in the night. Every once in a while, an ambulance would wail by and continue until it was a faint sound in the distance. Diesel filled the air as the bus made its regular stop in the neighborhood. It never stopped long enough to pick up anyone, just seemed to be going through the motion. She would sometimes hear the familiar sound of faint screams on this stretch of her walk, coming from different parts of the city, so it seemed. She often thought to herself, "I wonder if someone is dying right now, at this very moment." She didn't want to dwell on such morbid thoughts, so she picked up the pace, trying to find just a little more light to welcome her from the shadows of this dark and dreary night. She grew angrier at every step that she took as she reflected on how she ended up at this point in her life in the first place. She was a very beautiful girl, full of promise and ambition. She had a wonderful smile that masked all the pain hidden in her heart, and she kept it that way, not wanting to reveal the many skeletons in her closet. She didn't want any hints of an emotional breakdown to cloud anyone's judgment of her. She spent enough time judging herself. Her thoughts, however, took her back to that night when she was just 7 years old. That night, she would become a woman. After all, she was forced to do things only a woman should do. She was forced to do things a woman should not do. She squeezed her eyes tightly as she remembered the mixture of foam and blood that trickled down her tiny thighs. The smell of stale cigarettes and beer that seemed to emanate from his pores. The sweat that beaded up and dripped from his forehead into her eyes, stinging them and forcing them to stay shut through such a revolting experience. Her delicate tissue seemed to rip apart underneath dirty, jagged fingernails, and his dick that was forced inside of her, even though it did not fit. With an immense amount of pain and raw emotion, screams filled the air, screams that were just among the other screams that always seemed to possess the night air. Perhaps someone walking through these streets wondered if someone was dying at that moment. And in fact, there was. She was dying. The abuse went on much throughout her adolescent years. The pain, emotional and physical, never got easier. There was never a real relationship during those wonder years that she remembered. Just empty, meaningless sex with jocks from the football team, guys she barely knew, even her history teacher. It made her popular, and she found acceptance, although she grew to totally despise sex. It was the only thing that she felt that she was really good at. It got her jobs, money, dinners, and it even landed her a husband. Later in life, it led to rape, abuse, attempted suicide, prostitution, and now a relationship with a married man who obviously used her and would dispose of her like yesterday's trash. What a roller coaster ride through life. The only love that she had ever known was that of her grandmother. Clara's mother became pregnant at a young age. She couldn't properly care for a child. She ditched Clara on her grandmother frequently, leaving her for days at a time. No one knew where she was. Grandmother was a praying woman, and she seemed to always have a prayer in her heart for Clara's mother. It didn't seem like God had heard her prayers, though, because Clara's mother got worse. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months. When her mother did come for her, she would leave Clara in her tiny, dilapidated apartment to go out to the clubs to party and do whatever else was exciting out there in the world. Whatever it was apparent that it was better than being at home with Clara. And so she would leave Clara with him. She didn't want to address him by name. He would always be known to her as him. The man that forced himself on her countless times from the age of 7 to 16. It was at that age that Mother left her at her grandmother's house for the last time and did not come back. She was found dead 4 months later. Her throat cut. He did it. He was captured and convicted of murder. He was never convicted of rape or molestation or even injury to a child. He never knew how Clara had felt about him or the impact that the abuse had on her life or how she progressed in life after that. He probably didn't even care. All Clara knew was that he got away with what he had done to her. Clara's mother never knew what happened either, and now she was dead. He hung himself in jail while waiting to be transported to prison. Coward. It wasn't fair. No one ever told her that they were sorry because no one ever knew or would have even cared. Clara had to live with the hurt and pain without ever being able to tell anyone for fear that her secret would somehow be misused or not considered important. It was quite a burden to bear. It was kind of ironic that she feared what others would think about her being molested, yet she was so self-destructive sexually, and this did not seem to bother her at all. Grandmother made sure she was in church every Sunday. Clara hated church and rebelled against everything that church stood for. How could God let me go through those painful experiences? This God of love, joy, and peace, she thought. The invitation to accept Christ was presented to her Sunday, Monday night, and Wednesday during Bible study, all through her teenage years and even into adulthood. She accepted the invitation as a formality most times. She often did it just to please her grandmother and make her proud. However, her heart was broken. And Clara